decided, along with Mr. McAdoo, to pursue the injunction to try and restore his plan status in 2011, 2012. Sort of talk us through that, please.
Sure thing, Emmett. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you guys today, and I'm happy to respond to any questions. I got involved because this nefarious character called Bob Orr showed up in my office one day and asked me to take on a matter pro bono. The difference between Michael's situation and Devin's situation is that Devin's mom, Ms. Lee, was able to get him to good counsel, Bob, prior to a determination being made and him going into a reinstatement hearing. And that's the thing about the NCAA procedure that is just so jolting for somebody like me who's practiced law for 35 years. Federal, civil, and criminal cases, state cases, cases before administrative agencies, never prepared me for the kind of procedure that the NCAA uses. You'll notice that, as Bob said initially, I think perhaps Professor Gill made this point in the opening, it's the institution that makes an initial determination of ineligibility. And that determination is apparently made in many cases with absolutely no procedure at all. And then once that determination is made and the student athlete goes in for reinstatement, it essentially flips the presumptions that we're familiar with as attorneys on their head. He's essentially guilty until proven innocent. And if you couple that with the lack of transparency and the just obsessive secrecy that Marcia's talking about, this becomes especially problematic in terms of the student athlete having really any procedural rights that he or she can rely on. Deonta, I'll bet you got the same piece of paper. The NCAA gives you the paper when you come in for an interview, and basically it has you sign away your ability to talk with the media, to tell anyone anything about what goes on in that room. And that puts a tremendous amount of power in the NCAA, as Bomani said, to manage the flow of the information to the media. If you can't give your side of the story, but the NCAA can make its determinations and findings known, then people outside this specific process only hear one side of the story. You also have a situation here where, because the school makes the initial determination, the NCAA is able to escape any accountability for what they do. It's not us who determined that Mr. McAdoo was ineligible, it's the school. Well, just the fact that the school did not make its determination, did not wait for the honor court to hear his case before it made its determination, but went ahead and reported him as being ineligible before he had any sort of due process, doesn't seem to matter to them. And one thing that I have to tell you that probably irritates me more than anything else with the NCAA, have you guys ever watched a sporting event in which there's a commercial or two by the NCAA and they say it's all about the student athletes, it's all about the kids? Well, we're searching around for a theory to enable our client to sue the NCAA. And the theory that we finally came up with was one that's been used successfully in just 2 courts around the nation. And that is that the contract between an individual institution and the NCAA is a contract which is for the benefit of student athletes. And as intended third-party beneficiaries, they have a right to sue the NCAA when their rights are violated. Now, in light of all the propaganda you get from the NCAA, you would think they'd be all for recognizing that as a right. But in their briefs and in their oral arguments, they take the position that athletes are, at most, incidental, unintended beneficiaries of that contract. So forget what we said in our TV commercials. It's all about the $1.5 billion, and it's all about our power. You know, I could go on, Professor, but I think it's probably a good idea that you limited us in our time with opening statements.
Because one of the things I think, you know, I've been on a couple panels before, and really got something to say. So what I'd like to do is maybe deviate from the norm a little bit. And maybe if we could take a couple of minutes just for, because I was supposed to step back and do this at the beginning. But if each of our panelists could, an issue that's near and dear to your heart with regard to this issue of due process or the UNC investigation, if you could just speak to that for a couple of minutes and then we'll turn to some question and answer. Yes, sir.
Well, the one thing about the NCAA that's fascinating to me that I don't think people really understand what they're doing is strategically, if the NCAA actually has a purpose and they've got what they're trying to do, the way they do things is the only way it can work because they just don't have big enough staff to enforce these ridiculous rules. So the rules are unenforceable because there are too many of them, and they don't have a staff that can actually come and investigate. And to give you an indication of this, the best story I've heard from this investigation for UNC out of all of them is from the Sporting News that Robert Quinn and the UNC appointed attorney next to him, and they're talking and they're trying to figure out some information, and the guy says, hey, there's your cell phone on your knee. Can I see it? And so he looks at the lawyer, and the lawyer says, well, give him the cell phone. I'm not giving my cell phone to my girlfriend. I'll be damned if I'm going to give my cell phone to some dude I've never heard of, right, that comes in. But that's the only way that they can operate. When monitoring is low, then enforcement and everything else that comes behind it has to be high. So you wind up with this scare tactic. The Des Bryant case of 2009 is the same example. You ever been to Deion Sanders' house? No. You're suspended for the rest of the year. And that sets the table for what we have here, because the whole idea is now we're going to make everybody talk because you're going to be afraid that you can't play. What no one has explained to me is, so what if you don't play? If you look at the UNC, at what happened with UNC, let's take a list of the players who did not play. Austin got drafted, I'd say probably half a round to a round later than anybody expected, but that's because of the way everything went with him. He was absolutely 100% untrustworthy and talked too much. That won't get you drafted. I don't think it had anything to do with really the investigation, because Greg Little went about where he was going to go. Quinn went at most one spot below where he was going to go. Alden Smith got taken ahead of him at his position. You might have thought Quinn would have taken that, but that's all we're talking about is one spot. Nobody who didn't play really suffered a consequence. Now let's talk about the guys who did play. Bernie didn't get drafted. Deontay gets hurt at the end of the year, doesn't get drafted. Go look at these other places. A.J. Green caught a 4-game suspension. He got drafted where he was going to. Marcel Darius caught a 3-game suspension. He got drafted where he was going to. So I've always wondered at some point when the NCAA is going to come and try to deal with guys, and widespread people just say, no, we're not going to talk. We're not going to do it because ultimately they can't do anything. All they can do is stop you from making money for them. There's nothing they can do. They're not going to put you off campus and put you out of class because then they have no defense. You put that on the front page. Well, I wasn't going to talk because I couldn't get my own lawyer, and now they won't let me come to class. They're not going to do that, right? So what would happen if everybody stopped talking?
And you wonder what their enforcement powers are if folks stop talking. My initial reaction. I also want you to speak to, with your experience with UNLV, how you felt UNLV impacts NCAA enforcement now with all of our campuses. But one concern is injury, because a lot of those cats did suffer injury after coming back. Let's get other folks' thoughts. Thank you, Monty. Other folks, just things that you might want to share.
Well, in reference to not talking, I hope Devin doesn't mind me telling this story, but one of the first meetings we had with Dick Baddour, the athletic director, and one of the university lawyers and the compliance officer, it was not a contentious adversarial setting. It was really sort of an information setting. And when we got back outside, I asked Devin, who's 6'2", 250, I said, Devin, did you feel okay about how the meeting went? And he said, it was terrifying. And I said, what do you mean? He says, Mr. Baddour runs everything. Well, if you know Dickie Baddour, it's hard to think of him as terrifying. But these young men, and I'm saying women in the other sports, look at the university officials, the coaches. These are authority figures. And when a lawyer from the NCAA comes in, or the university legal counsel, you're not going to say, or 99.9% are not going to say, I won't talk, I won't cooperate, or I want to call a lawyer. I mean, that's just not going to happen. And the two things among many that trouble me, one is the media perception that these are bad kids. My experience, and Marsha can probably talk to it a lot better, and Deontay, these are good kids. I mean, sometimes they make bad decisions, but across the board, these are good young men and women playing sports around the country. And so this impression, this lack of sympathy or understanding for the fact that they are being deprived of basic rights, I think is wrong and unfortunate. And so you have the media, and then what I would say is the hypocrisy. Who in the upper echelons of higher education in the state of North Carolina or around the country has spoken up and said, Joe Nacera of the New York Times is on to something, or Emmett Gill down at Central's talking about something that's important? You see some faculty getting involved. You see former athletes or medias or maybe, some lawyers. But the leadership of the universities have totally sold out and failed to stand up for the very individuals they're in business to look after. And that's troubled me more than anything. Marcia.
I'd like to just follow Bob because I want to get underneath some of the dynamics that he's talking about when you ask what are some issues that come up in this situation that are near and dear to our hearts. For me, there is so much about how this has all gone that has to do with race and white privilege. And by that I mean that the mentalities of whiteness have been the norms of how this has all gone. And it has been so easy for so many people, so many very intellectually evolved people, to believe that these kids did something wrong. It was so easy for them to go from point A to point B with nothing to fill in that gap. And to me, that is because we live in a culture that has not dealt with race and privilege. And the privileging comes, too, in not just how easy it was to assume guilt, but in how easy it was for a university to simply just follow through in a system that is absolutely unjust and to let heads roll right and left of people who did nothing wrong and who were actually part of real solutions. If the university really cared about academic integrity and the well-being of their student athletes, they would not have fired all the coaches. The people who loved these kids, recruited these kids, knew these young men for the good people that they are. The coaches didn't have any opportunity to share those stories about who these guys really are. And to me, that it was just like a well-worn creek bed. The water started rolling down that way, and it was so easy for people to think. And no one is talking about that most of the people who benefit from the system as it is are white, and most of the people who are harmed by this system as it is are black.
You got to say something interesting right along those same lines that I thought was very funny, was that when Butch Davis took the job at Carolina at the end of the 2006 season, the big fear was that we're going to bring Miami to North Carolina, right? Now, never mind the fact that Butch was the guy who cleaned out Miami. That was the story. But there's a prevailing notion that you can't be good at football without a collection of hoodlums on your team. The irony of all of this is that when Butch took this job, it was a wholesale change in who was recruited. These are the nice kids that Butch brought in. And the entire story for this, there's only one outright bad person that I've heard described in all of this, and that's a gentleman named Chris Hawkins, who played for the last coach when they were sorry. And the assumption really was that the program had improved, and you cannot improve without having kids that are doing something wrong. But the wrongest person in any of this was a guy that was around when they were going 3-8. Mm-hmm. That's the funniest thing about it, but it's so funny that you can't just have black kids. They've got to be. We saw this at Duke when they had recruiting struggles and then all of a sudden brought in a kid named Kyrie and somebody else, and all of a sudden they were so sure they were coming back to Kyrie and Andre were coming to save Duke. That was the whole idea. Because you had to, it's not just that you could have black kids, but you had to have those guys. And it goes even that much further that once a team is good or is improving, the assumption is that you automatically have bad kids that you then have to watch.
And also, just to piggyback on that too, I think part of that is also why it's so easy for people to settle into that the problem is academics versus athletics. When I feel like that is such a false dichotomy, a false argument.
Definitely want to get going back in and the answer very quick because I want to keep going back to the student athletes. And one of the things that struck me was that I was working with a couple of law students here at NCCU on an article we processed with the teaching in graduate school at our Department of Social Work, and no less than 5 students had come to me because they had conversations with UNC football players who did not have coaches who they could go talk to. They did not have some peers who they could talk to because these are the guys who messed up Carolina big time season. Faculty members, we know that from the literature, faculty members have negative perceptions of student athletes. So I want to get back to that piece, but I also want to underscore, especially for our students out there who are working in the legal field, this notion of white privilege is real. As an assistant professor, I believe that everybody has privilege in certain environments. If I go down the street to my old neighborhood, I have privilege. But certainly when I walk into some forums, regardless of my degree, I feel intimidated. I felt intimidated when I first met you.
It's hard to believe.
I felt intimidated.
You learned quickly that you didn't need to.
So I encourage you to go look up the notion of white privilege, in particular, Peggy McIntosh. She talks about 47 different sort of scenarios that demonstrate white privilege. Well, I want to get to the athlete. Look, I know you have your own feelings in this, but can you take us, before you share that, back to the student athletes, how you guys were sort of feeling, maybe some things that were going on that you couldn't share then that you could share now?
Sure. I just want to say this. It feels good just to hear some of the comments that you guys are saying. It definitely agrees with some of the feelings that I have. But if I can go back to that time, it was very secretive. It was a CIA type of mission, in our eyes. We really didn't know what to do. The only people who we could talk to were the people going through it. There was allegedly a meeting held by the players that we were all, asked about. Did you guys have this meeting? Did you guys have this meeting? What was said at this meeting? The meeting supposedly was supposed to be, we had a meeting at Jennifer Wiley's house and told her not to, go through the investigation. So when I was called in, I probably interviewed for maybe 2 hours, asked me about what did I do. That was maybe 15, 20 minutes. Probably 30 minutes was about this meeting with Jennifer Wiley, and probably an hour was about Marvin and all these other guys. So all the information that I kind of leaked to them was only about myself. I told them I don't know about anybody else. I told them don't tell me stuff. You know what I'm saying? I don't know about it. That was my response. I think I had 3 meetings with NCAA. The second meeting, after I told them my trips that I took and all of that stuff, which was paid by me. I paid for everything for my trips. Second meeting was more about myself, asking me to recall dates and times and things of that nature of 3 years ago. What was this? What hotel did you stay at? How did you pay for it? Da-da-da-da-da. And if you were caught up, I was caught up in a misunderstanding. I said that I booked the hotels in my name, and they weren't in my name. They were in a former player's name. I wasn't 25 or didn't have a credit card or something. His card was on the thing. And because this was mixed up, that's why I got my judgment. But, I mean, there was nowhere for us to really go. I couldn't really tell my mom, although she, was reaping more. I don't care. I don't go outside. I stay in my house. I watch TV or do whatever. I don't really go out a lot. But my mom goes to the grocery store, go to church, go to this. My face is on the news. I'm not playing. What's going on? So your families are more affected than you are, really. It's embarrassing. You're the target. You're guilty until proven innocent. I appealed my case even to the NCAA, which was, kind of messed up. What was the purpose of that? And it fell on deaf ears. Even though I might have had a good case or whatever, we were kind of just trapped in a system that just wasn't working for us.
How was your relationship with the athletic department?
I'm not gonna lie, the coaches didn't know much. They didn't know much, but they're our leaders, so they have to put up a front for us so that we can kind of understand everything. Coach Davis would talk to us every now and then, that big group, and just tell them, just tell the truth, just tell the truth, just tell the truth, which is right, just tell the truth. But at the same time, some of the guys' truths wasn't good for them. You know what I mean? But some coaches, not Coach Shute, but some coaches were mad at the players for even putting them in that situation. Our situation was we had 3 DBs that were starters that couldn't play. You know what I mean? So we had freshmen that never really got a lot of playing time. They got to be starters, LSU. We had a third string or a walk-on starting as our nickel package against LSU. We almost beat them too. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But it was really tough with the coaches. But one thing I do want to say is I was watching the Whitney Houston funeral, and her bodyguard said something about her being an entertainer. And because she's an entertainer, her life is exposed to everybody. And I don't think people really look at college students as entertainers, although we go through all the stress and none of the compensation from it. We do get a free scholarship, which is great, but our lives are exposed. Any bad decisions, some good decisions are exposed, but we take all the risk, and our reward is very minimal. I'm a pro for paying players. Like you guys said, there was a lot of money that's being made off of players' backs. While I was in school, I decided I wanted to start up a company to promote parties and comedy shows and things like that, some type of entertainment. Well, I went through this whole thing and made an LLC, and it got all the way to the thing where I had a picture on Facebook about a party that I was promoting, I was throwing that night. And I could not make any money from that party because I belonged to the NCAA. So any proceeds that I made belonged to them. You know what I mean? Which wasn't right. I didn't see why they needed to, have any of my money that I made throwing the party. You know what I'm saying? So those are things that aren't right. Some of those rules kind of get me. But like I said, it's a system that I don't believe is fair, and I'm just here to try to produce some change.
On the table, there might be a copy left, but the organization I spoke to about Human Rights Project over the Christmas holiday, my project was to develop a system for figuring out how much the players who are involved in BCS bowls should be paid based on the NFL revenue sharing pieces. So that piece is there and it's online on our website. So things that are near and dear to your heart when we talk about this issue of due process. I read the complaint, Mike's complaint that you filed on his behalf, and it's just so complex. It seems so clear with regard to his rights, his protected rights, his property rights, and his liberty rights. What's near and dear to your heart?
A couple of things. Let me first say that it really resonates with me when Deonta says those guys had no place to go, nobody to talk to. And this is just an opinion. I can't prove it, but it appears to me that the NCAA process is set up intentionally to keep these people from having any kind of access to representation. Now, they are told, and Deonta, I don't know if you were told this or not, you can have a lawyer. However, people are also counseled that if they get a pro bono attorney, then that in itself would be an improper benefit which would disqualify them for further prosecution.
Yes.
So you have a 20-year-old young man or young woman. I remember, believe it or not, I can still remember when I was 20 years old. I mean, the idea that you're going to go out and with your own funds attract and select and employ competent counsel is just a travesty. Beyond that, I think that, and I think Bob mentioned this earlier, that a lot of these young people don't really understand that the folks from the university, particularly the university's counsel, are not representing their interest. In North Carolina, for those of you who are law students, our rules of professional responsibility put the burden on a licensed attorney when she is dealing with somebody who may not be sophisticated in business or experienced in business matters to proactively and affirmatively say, hey, I'm not your lawyer. You need to have separate counsel. I mean, that is just expected of attorneys. But I don't think, at least from the information I had, that anybody told you guys, Deonta, hey, I'm not your lawyer. You want to get a separate lawyer because my first responsibility is to the university.
No, we weren't advised like that. Like I said, the only piece of advice when it comes to lawyers, they did have a list of lawyers, local lawyers. They couldn't direct you to anyone or anyone who's had any NCAA experience. They just had a list of lawyers. You had to close your eyes and pick one. You know what I mean? But like I said, they said if you feel like you did something wrong, get a lawyer. If you feel like you didn't do something wrong, don't get one. And we were actually, we thought if we did not have a lawyer, things would be better off for us.
Oh, yeah. And
Why is that?
I'm sure.
Why? You said you
Well,
had one, you thought it would be better off?
well, the mood in there was if you got a lawyer, you did something wrong. You have something to hide and protect. So if you go in there by yourself and answer every question that they give you, nothing will happen to you. We were even, I'll say, tricked into saying we had a meeting one night. I think it was Thursday night before the LSU game. We were all in a room, and the guy just said, hey, look, everybody just tell the truth tonight. Don't worry about not playing in the game. No one's going to get suspended for this first game. Everybody tells the truth. Just get it out there. Now, whatever happens after this first game, we do not know. But we need to get the truth out there on the table.
This is amongst you as players.
As well as a representative. I don't want to put his name out. But after he left, we were all left in the room to kind of talk amongst each other. And so some people are saying, yeah, we're going to tell the truth. We're going to just get it out there. You know, he said we're still going to play the LSU game, so why not? And I think after those meetings, that's when some people were kind of put into different categories. Well, he's definitely not going to play. He might play. You're all right. You can play this week. You know what I mean?
And Deonta, when you were interviewed by the NCAA investigators, did you notice how they would ask you the same question 4 different ways at 4 different times?
Yeah.
I mean, these were the classic kind of third degree trying to catch you in something that you misspoke about or make you give the same answer several times. If you'd had your lawyer sitting there with you, he or she would have said, hey, you've asked that question. Let's move along.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, they get these guys in there with no legal counsel and essentially grill them and try to entrap them into saying something that they can prove is not true. Also, Emmett, I don't want to let this opportunity pass without talking about the way that the NCAA discourages an institution from supporting and standing up for its own people. I think it would be fair to say that the university was very sympathetic to some of these guys and at least expressed sympathy. But the NCAA has such power over member institutions that they felt that they could not man up and tell the NCAA, you're out of line here, leave these guys alone. There's a wonderful little gem in the NCAA bylaws. It's Article 19.7. What that says, and I've got copies of it here if anybody wants to see it, because this is kind of unbelievable, but it says that if you are a player who's been determined ineligible, you go to court and a judge gives you an injunction to allow you to play. If that injunction is ever dissolved or reversed, not only do you not play from that point forward, but there's a list of paragraphs A through I of the penalties they can impose against the university, including taking back TV money, disqualifying or changing the results of games and championships. And so it is a situation where the people at the university, the administrators, are literally terrified, unless you're someplace like Auburn where this happens every other week. Are literally terrified of the NCAA, and they bend over backwards to